It's taken a couple of years, but Cisco's finally invited his senior staff for a meal. Well, some of them. O'Brien's not there and neither is Dax, but he has extended the offer to Odo, despite him not having a digestive system. I guess Odo's mellowed a little on the not having a job anymore thing, given that he accepted the offer. Dax's arrival means O'Brien's the only one missing now. She grabs a drink and, while waiting for dinner, finds a musical instrument apparently modelled on an ergonomic keyboard. It's Jake's, but he was utter arse at it, something Dax can relate to as none of her previous hosts have ever had any skill in that area. It's odd then when she starts playing a tune on it, and one that she seems to recognise enough to understand that she's playing it slightly wrong, despite then saying it's something she's never heard before. She even rudely tells Bashir to shut up when he talks over the tune, though that might just be because it's him. Dinner being served diverts everybody else to the table, though Dax stays at the keyboard. She's similarly distracted later when she and Cisco play chess, her humming a tune the whole time. A poor move on her part leads to an accusation of cheating and her swiping the board before storming out. Kira receives similarly dickish treatment when she tries to check on Dax later, and the altercation nearly turns violent. It all comes to a head when Dax starts experiencing shenanigans on the promenade. Music plays and she sees somebody in a robe and mask. The figure changes positions and removes mask to reveal more underneath, all of which is enough to make Dax back up. She runs into Quark and the moment is over, his queries about whether she's okay waved away as she leaves. Either her actions have caused others to be concerned or she's realised things aren't right herself and gone to see Bashir. She apologises to Cisco for acting like a tit earlier, saying she doesn't understand the anger she's experiencing. She also thinks she knows whoever was in the mask from her hallucinations, but can't pin it down. Perhaps identifying the music will help, and Cisco suggests asking the computer to compare what she remembers against known compositions. Bashir's checking everything he can, including Dax's medical history throughout multiple lifetimes, to see if this could be related to the bellyworm. The only thing that matches is Torias, the host before Curzon. He had a bit of unpleasantness in a shuttle crash and was in a coma for months. While he was under, his brainial chemicals had an oopsie and the bellyworm was taken out to save it. The death of Torias was the price of that decision. Slight problem though, those same brainial chemicals are dropping right now too. Bashir doesn't think it's immediately dangerous, but a trip back home to ask some experts would be a wise move. It's also a good excuse for using this season's new Defiant sets, Starfleet apparently deciding that we should keep the experimental craft with Romulan tech on it docked at the door to an invading force. Dax visits Bashir during the journey for some company, unable to sleep. She doesn't like the place they're going to, though it's probably fairer to say she doesn't like her memories of it, as her time spent there before joining was stressful and arduous. The rigorous medical tests that hosts go through probably didn't help her fear of doctors either. Slightly tactless given her present company, but Bashir surprises her by saying he was the same as a kid. The result is an offer to sleep with him tonight, but as these quarters have bunk beds, that's not quite as scandalous as it sounds. The offer has the desired effect, and she's soon asleep. To a room at the Symbiosis Commission, the organisation in charge of bellyworm-related guff. Dax has been poked and prodded and is now greeted by a certain Dr. Renhol. They knew each other from before Jadzia was joined, Jadzia being somewhat of a celebrity as nobody else ever got removed from the course, only to successfully reapply. Dr. Renhol brings good news too. Dax has been put on a treatment to fix those brainial chemicals and won't need to stay in, though should come back tomorrow for a checkup. Back to the ship we go, where both Cisco and Bashir insist she get some rest, so she goes to do just that. She doesn't make it. As she's walking down a corridor, the music begins again and the cloaked figure with a mask reappears. Two Trill pop out of a door to the side of her and have a bit of a wrestle, one getting an elbow to the face for her trouble. The other's about to get twatted when Dax snaps out of it to find the target is Bashir and she was hallucinating again. So much for the treatment. Dr. Renhol's not as concerned as everybody else. She says an unexpected jump in those brainial chemicals might be what caused another incident, so we're going to give smaller doses more regularly. Odd thing though, the people who tried to grab Dax in her hallucinations were wearing uniforms from this establishment, but 100 years out of date. That had placed them in the lifetime of Terias, the host before Curzon, the one who was in a coma and ended up being separated from the bellyworm. Renhol thinks this is all just Dax getting a bit mixed up, and everything's entirely above board, honest. Dax has decided a second opinion might be in order, and that's why we're going to have a chat with The Guardians. The Guardians is a 1971 TV drama about England being controlled by a fascist dictatorship, but that's not what Dax meant. She was referring to the group who take care of the bellyworms in their natural cave environment, the place where they do bellyworm sex to make bellyworm babies. One such Guardian is able to tell who Dax is, though there's some debate about whether he's referring to the current Gestalt or the bellyworm itself. Indeed, he can tell that something's off just by holding his hand over the symbiont and asks how bad her dreams are. Dax mentions hallucinations, and we learn they're neither dreams nor hallucinations, but actually memories. He thinks one of the hosts is playing silly buggers, and Dax is taken away to see what the Guardian can learn. We don't go with her because that would have needed another new set, so we learn about the experience when she's back on the Defiant. In short, we don't know. The Guardian still thinks one of the hosts is arsing about, but doesn't know which one, so asked her to come back tomorrow for another go. We've made progress elsewhere, though, as that check to identify the music has found results. We'll assume they transferred the search to the Defiant, or were called by DS9 to let them know. Regardless, the music was written by a lad called Joran the best part of 100 years back. An image of the guy sends Dax on another hallucination, this time to watch the figure in the mask give a guy in a chair some really shit acupuncture. Dax grabs the figure afterwards and the mask disappears as she reaches for it, revealing somebody who I presume is the guy from the photo? Personally, I find it quite difficult to tell given the change in angle and lighting conditions, but it seems like a logical conclusion, so let's go with it. Back in reality, Dax is not well. Some shaking makes her have a lie down, and Bashir says her brainial things are going very wrong indeed. Dr. Renhol doesn't know why Dax has taken a turn for the worse and is starting to clutch at straws. Hardly surprising, really, as Trill culture places the life of the bellyworm above the host, so if we don't find the cause and fix it, Dax will be removed from Jadzia and she'll cark it as a result. Another chat with the Guardian would seem to be in order, only he's now become rather uncooperative and blankly refuses to give an opinion or offer any help. Sounds proper dodgy to Bashir and Sisko, this guy now avoiding a discussion on previous hosts, coupled with Dax taking a dive when she saw the picture of Joran, makes them conclude that would be a good place to start looking. Or not. This lad Joran doesn't have a whole lot of information on him, which is pretty odd given how well recorded hosts tend to be. Bashir doing a science to the file reveals why. Some buggers deleted significant portions of it. A bit of cross-referencing provides an interesting coincidence, as Joran carked it on the same day that Terias did, the Dax host before Curzon and the one that was in a coma. We all know what plain simple Garak thinks about coincidences, so they keep digging on the name and find a potential relative. A quick call reveals we're through to Joran's brother, which makes him pretty old. After a little preamble, he says Joran carked it 85 years back, and it wasn't a particularly good death either. He was trying to become a host, and when he was rejected, he murderized the doctor who caused it and was killed while legging it. Thing is, the brother spoke to Joran a little before the death and said that he sounded different, and he claimed he'd been joined. That's enough for Sisko and Bashir to connect the dots, and the conclusion they reach is that somebody at the Symbiosis Commission is telling Porkies about just how many hosts Dax has had. Dr. Renhol's getting ready to remove Dax's bellyworm and kill the host in the process, so she's not happy to see Sisko and Bashir. She's even less happy to learn that they know about Joran, and sends away her assistant while they talk. Renhol's attempts to deny what happened become moot when Sisko and Bashir go through what they've pieced together. Nearly a century back, the Symbiosis Commission gave the Dax bellyworm to Joran. All well and good, save for one small problem. Joran was completely out of his fucking tree. That's embarrassing enough when you have a whole regime to filter out unsuitable candidates, but the fact that he was able to make the joining at all raises a larger problem. See, those rigorous checks and filters are supposed to be there because an unsuitable host would cause a rejection and kill both host and bellyworm. This is the basis upon which the Commission says they operate. How unfortunate it would be for them, then, if the general population discovered it was complete bollocks, and that Joran, unstable and violent as he was, had been joined for 6 months. That might raise some difficult questions from the people told they were unsuitable. Being rejected because it was physically dangerous is one thing. Learning that it was just because the people in charge of handing out bellyworms thought you were shit is quite another. That's why it was covered up and the memories erased from the Dax symbiont before it was implanted into Curzon. Renhold points out what would happen if all of this became public knowledge, the complete collapse of the system they have. Symbionts could be implanted against their will, treated as little more than status symbols at best, or used as a way to carry your consciousness and impose it upon the next host at worst. That latter point is one she warned Sisko of with Dax. Removing the blocks they'd placed on all memories of Joran is the only way to restore the link between host and symbiont, and that could mean he takes control. Sisko's of the opinion that the choice of whether to restore the memory or remove the bellyworm isn't ours to make in the first place. It's Jadzia Dax's. Given the information Sisko's threatening to share, Renhold doesn't have much of a choice. Dax is woken and told both the truth and her options. Down in the caves where the Guardians take care of shagging bellyworms, Dax is taking a dip. Another bellyworm comes over and Emperor Palpatines her, the result of which is a vision of Joran rising from the same pool. Dax gives him a cuddle while more force lightning plays over them as he's absorbed. Back on DS9, Sisko's calling on Dax to see how she's doing and maybe look for any new tendencies towards doing a murder. Bashir had the same idea 15 minutes prior, apparently, and he's still alive, so that's proof enough that she's in control. Sisko leaves Dax alone to sit at a table and play the murder tune, so we'll do the same, until the next adventure. First things first, then, bollocks. There's an old saying with multiple variations and attributions, but the most basic concept runs thus: 2 people can keep a secret if one of them is dead. It's the principle upon which the overwhelming majority of conspiracies fall down, the idea that everybody even tangentially related to a secret would keep it to their grave. Politicians can't even keep their affairs secret, but a global conspiracy involving thousands, with the focus of an entire civilization's culture firmly aimed at it, has kept this to themselves? With joined Trill pootling all over the shop for more than a century and being checked by doctors here, there and everywhere? That no biologist, Trill or otherwise, has ever said to themselves, "Hey, I've got a great idea, why don't we look into the differences between unjoined and joined Trill to increase compatibility rates?" That not a single person has ever tried to join outside of the Commission's power. There's one word for that, and the word is bollocks. In fact, we know it is. Last season's episode Invasive Procedures had just such a taking of symbiont by force. We could say that doesn't disprove the Commission's argument in itself, as they weren't joined for long enough for it to be rejected, but for the conspiracy to work, we must assume that he was the first person to ever try it in their history. Bollocks, bollocks, bollocks. Now that's out of the way, let's put on our suspension of disbelief goggles and deal with the rest. We've previously thrown around some ideas on this channel regarding Trill culture and the possible history of the current method of selecting hosts. We've spoken about the potential for joining being abused to create a ruling class of forever Trill, basically the Goa'uld of Stargate, attaining immortality through multiple bodies. The Symbiosis Commission then could be viewed as either a safeguard against this, or the method by which it is perpetuated. They're who get to choose subsequent generations of joined Trill after all, and it's hardly an impartial process when joined Trill themselves get to make judgments that can essentially kill an application stone dead. Jadzia herself was the only example of this ever having been reversed. The problem with viewing all of this harshly is that there aren't many better ways of doing it. Once the truth that nearly 50% of Trill would survive the process became known, it would only be a matter of time before political interests started interfering in the whole thing for personal gain. The only truly neutral system would be selecting hosts and symbionts at random, a kind of lottery for joining. How many of those selected would be prepared for what comes? How many of them would still abide by the rules set out to not continue past commitments? How many Jorans would it make? There is one possibility we don't explore in this situation, though, that all of this might be the will of the symbionts themselves. We know they communicate with each other, and the comments of the Guardian imply that they can communicate with the Unjoined, so it's entirely possible that this is the situation they requested. Of course, that still leaves some moral questions, as it basically means they're asking for the cream of the crop, but the selection process being performed by all involved parties does at least lend the whole thing credibility. The system controlled by the Symbiosis Commission might be a shit one, but it might also be the least shit one. Some questions simply don't have a right answer. Let's move on then, and there's a line I'd like to examine from this one. As Dax is fiddling with the keyboard, she says none of Dax's hosts, even Jadzia, had any musical ability. On the surface, it's a reference to herself in the third person, except not really. Jadzia Dax is not Jadzia. Jadzia was the pre-joining entity. The people she knows on DS9 use the two interchangeably, and she doesn't make any comment on it, but I wonder if that's preferred. Does Dax not mention it in day-to-day life because it's simply more trouble than it's worth to explain it to those around her than just answer to both? Would the distinction be more strictly observed by other joined Trill, the correct terminology being considered a matter of importance to them? I ask because it strikes me that this could be another aspect where joined Trill are representative of the trans community. I think we've mentioned before on here that the character of Dax was seen by some as an allegory, albeit unintentionally. It's reasonable then to ask if the naturally developing aspects of that character would also follow the same lines, exploring real-life principles not originally foreseen by the writers. Another example, perhaps, that stumbling into larger topics is inevitable when you try to make a show that's progressive. Before we go, there's a lovely bit of completely unintentional foreshadowing that I'd like to point out. In Bashir's quarters on the Defiant, he has this conversation with Dax. Dax, I never told you this before, Julian, but I've always been afraid of doctors. Bashir, most people are. When I was younger, I was terrified of them. Slightly later on, Bashir says of doctors, as I got older, I decided that I wanted to know what they knew, be as smart as they were. There's a very interesting conversation to be had about those lines, and what it might mean for Bashir to be sharing them with Dax, but I'm afraid that particular digression is one we won't be able to have for another couple of seasons. End of episode.
Are you saying that every single job offer we were given has been from the Dominion?
Everything except the stuff Morn wanted us to do, and we can't talk about that because the channel will get demonetized.
Does this qualify as having found the quest then?
You what?
Well, the whole job thing was to find a new shtick for these end credits, if you remember.
You mean the ones that were originally supposed to mention the Patreon, but the guy who runs this feels weird talking about it, so instead the whole thing devolved into a nonsensical collection of tangents that now somehow has more lore than Harry Kim?
Yup, those ones. Anyway, we were doing this to find a quest, right? So maybe the quest is trying to find out who keeps giving us these jobs?
Sounds bloody dangerous, frankly, but we've already been locked up for ignoring it, so I suppose it'd be self-preservation to take a look.
That's the spirit. Woof.